Welcome to Interviews With. I'm your host, Nick Busco. Today I have an interview with a gentleman named Meri Took. Meri and I met each other back in the late 70s on a Neil Young tour here in the States. Meri is from Australia, so he has a take on what it was like touring around the world, also starting a business in Australia when he did see a hole in the market. But anyway, before we get into that, I want to point you to these guys back here. These guys right here. They're with a band called DMA, and they're Meri's sons. They tour in Australia, Mexico, and the UK. Now, they may have been here in the States, I don't know. You're going to have to do your own research, but they have some great music. They have some videos you need to look at, some music that you can listen to, and just go for it. They're really a great band. And they also have a great mom and a great dad. But anyway, let's get on and let's see what Meri has to say. Thanks for stopping by.
My name is Meri, M-E-R-I. My surname is Took, T-O-O-K. I used to be a roadie.
Yes, you did. Absolutely. So, okay, I guess my first question is, how did you get into the business? I mean, how did you, like, the chain of events?
Well, I was a penniless, starving musician who wanted to be good but really didn't have much talent. So luckily I fell in with a crowd of roadies who invited me to come and work with them from time to time. And in 1978, Bob Dylan came to Sydney and did a show at the showgrounds, and they needed lots of roadies to set it up. In fact, that's when I first met Patrick Stansfield. And I worked on that gig for 4 days. I knew nothing about it. I just learned on the job and did what I could. And at the end of it, I just had the best weekend I'd had in a long time. I was exhausted, made more money than I made in the previous 6 months. And I decided that, this was a pretty good lifestyle and pretty good money and pretty good fun, and there was a sense of achievement at the end of it, seeing the finished show and going, well, I was part of helping put that together. And then very quickly sort of moved into lighting, became a thing that I was doing, and within months I was touring the country with international rock and roll bands, putting up their lighting rigs.
Were you working for anybody in particular, any company in particular?
No, I managed to, I'm not very good at working for other people, so I was really a subcontractor. So I never signed an employment contract with anyone. The other thing I did, I started the first professional crewing service in Sydney, called Sydney Crewing Service. And the work I did, I got through a crewing service, but it was all run by junkies and drug addicts and losers and fools. And it didn't take me long to realise that I could do a much better job than them. So I approached the local production manager and said, look, I'm working for these clowns. I know they're clowns. They're really unorganised. I can do a much better job if you call me and get your crew from me. I've just registered a business name. I'm all legit. You want to start getting proper crew? Call me.
Now, was that after is that before you came to the States and did your tour?
Long time before.
Long time before. Oh, wow.
3 or 4 years before.
Wow. So you were kind of in the flow at all.
Yeah, I'd already established that. We were the only serious crewing agency in Sydney, Australia. And we did every single rock and roll show that came through town.
Back to 3 or 4 years, you're on the road, or you're doing things in Australia, all over Australia, doing shows, small shows, large shows. What bands did you work with? Just local bands? Or?
Mainly big tours. Really didn't work with any local bands. I sort of moved straight onto the big tours, and I picked it up really quickly. Within a few months I was actually crew bossing, running the crews. I went to university and did mathematics and physics, and a lighting system is just a system.
Yes. It's
just a system of numbers, and plug the right thing into the right hole and everything should work. And if it doesn't, you have a series of steps that you take to track down the fault and remedy it. It's not rocket science, concert lighting, not in any way, shape or form, especially before the advent of automated lighting fixtures. You know, when we used to use just generic fixtures, it was pretty simple. Either electricity goes into it or it doesn't. So, yeah, anyway, so, you know, and I was always really good with organising people, and I wasn't particularly good at working for other people, so it's kind of like I had to be the boss or nothing.
Right.
Yeah, it was
right.
sort of how it was for me.
Yeah.
But it worked out pretty well because it generally meant I got paid better than the other guys for taking more responsibility. And it also meant that I could negotiate my own fees, and I didn't go and work for a company as such. So,
Well, my question is then, the next one leads to me is, how did you hook up with Neil Young?
I was touring Australia with Elvis Costello, and coincidentally, I got on really well with Elvis and the band and the crew and everybody. And they came to me one morning and said, "We have an extra ticket to London. Would you like to come to London?" And I thought, I'll need some time to get my affairs in order. They said, "Well, you know, you have 48 hours. So I got my business. Luckily, I had a friend who lived in my house who could run the business for me. And I got a passport within 24 hours, and I was on a plane, and we stopped at Hong Kong for 3 days and had a lot of fun in the Peninsula Hotel in Hong Kong, and then ended up in London, which was all very nice. I got a free ticket to London. But of course, once I got to London, Elvis wasn't touring anymore. So it was like, here you are in London, better find a job. So I just sort of introduced myself to a few lighting companies, typed up a quick resume. Ended up having a meeting with a guy called Adrian who ran Tasco in London. And he put me to work sort of helping prep systems. I did that for a couple of weeks. I ended up going to his office and saying, "Look, I'm not really a system prepping guy unless it's my tour I'm prepping." I said, "You know, what do you got coming up?" He said, "Well, it looks like Neil Young's coming to town. We need someone on the crew." "Oh, that sounds pretty good. You know, what do you pay your crew guys?" "Oh, we pay them," I can't remember the money, but it was like, you know, £50 a day or something like that. I said, "Well, I'm not really a crew guy, I'm more of a crew boss. What do they get paid?" "Oh, they get paid £75 a day." I said, "Okay, I'll be that guy." It was like, "Well, you know, we've got a lot of crew bosses." I said, "Yeah, but they're not as good as me."
There you go.
So, you know, like, you have a think about it and you get back to me. And the next day I got the phone call, "Yeah, you know, we want you to crew boss a Neil Young tour of Europe." I said, "Yeah, there's one thing. I've got this Australian friend who's a lighting person." It was a girl called Deborah Vincent. So I said, "I want Deborah on the crew too," because she was like the hardest working lighting person I've ever met. And he said, "Yeah, okay, great." So, you know, we got Deb came along, and we headed off around Europe with Neil.
That's great. So Deb flew up from Australia.
No, Deb was already living in London.
Oh, she was.
Yeah, she was around.
There you go. Yeah, I didn't know that.
She was around, yeah. So, yeah, that's how we sort of met up with you guys and with Neil and with all the crew.
So, how did you hook up with Bob Stern? Was that through Neil?
Okay, so after we did this big tour of Europe, at the end of the tour, we were all exhausted, of course, and Neil was really happy with the way the tour went, and he said, "Okay, my little present to the crew is I'm going to fly you home first class." I said, "Neil, I don't have a home." "Well, I do, but it's in Australia. I don't want to go there." He said, "Well, where do you want to go?" I said, "Well, where are you going?" He said, "I'm going back to California." I said, "Well, maybe I'll go there too." So that was my first trip to the States. I ended up flying back with Neil and his family and some of the crew, first class, Pan Am, I think it was.
God, that's a long defunct airline.
Yeah. Right back to LA. And landed in LA, and of course Neil went off to his ranch with his family, and there I was in LA, and Deborah was with me too, and we were all together in LA, and it was like, check into a hotel now, you know, try and find a place to stay and all of that. And start looking for some work. And it was difficult because we didn't have a green card. We were technically on a vacation on a holiday visa. So, but we found some work, and then
what kind of stuff were you doing?
there was a company in LA called Automated Lighting, and I went to see them one day. I was just turn up and walk in and say, hey, this is me, this is what I've done, this is what I've been doing. And there's this huge pile of Altman Lecos, which was an aluminium profile spot. That they're aluminium castings, and the yoke connectors would, because it was only aluminium, would just strip out all the time. And I'd repaired quite a few in Australia. I knew how to repair them. I'd drill them out, retap them, get them. There was this big pile in the corner, and I said to the guy, I said, what's with the big pile of Lecos in the corner? And he said, they don't work, they're useless, they're all stripped out. And I said, you can fix that? He said, you can? I said, sure. He said, well, why don't you come in tomorrow and start fixing them?
There you go.
I got myself a job. That was my first job in LA. So I spent a couple of weeks in there and I fixed about 100 of the things. And they put them back in stock, and I think they went out on the Peter Gabriel tour or something. They all went back out. A couple of weeks later, he was very thankful and very grateful. And then, a few things happened. In Excess came to town for their first ever American tour. And someone, through a friend of a friend, found out that I was in LA. So I got a phone call and said, well, we're touring, but we're supporting. We're supporting the Kinks, and we're supporting Adam Ant. We're supporting all these bands. And we want to make sure that we don't get fucked over by the main act, and we still get the production we need and the lighting and the sound. And so we want a guy on the road with us who is like our production guy, and does our lights and communicates with the American crew, make sure we don't get done over. So I became that guy. And of course, we all know how that worked out. That worked out pretty good for an Excess.
Yes, it did.
And they ended up, coming back a number of times. And then one time there, that's right. And then we went and stayed on Neil's ranch for 6 weeks. There wasn't a lot going on. It was like needed a bit of a break. And I think Tim Foster said, hey, come up to the ranch. We've got 3 houses up there. Neil had his house, and they had the red house and the white house, and where the crew would stay. And spent 6 weeks on Neil's ranch. Got his horses fit. Neil had a beautiful old horse called Traveller, who was getting really unfit, and another horse whose name I can't remember, like an Indian Cherokee name or some damn thing. And horses hadn't been ridden for a long time. So we started riding them. We got them fit. By the end of 6 weeks, we had them galloping through the ranch. Neil couldn't believe it, the change in the horses. I said, well, you ride them every day, they'll get fit. You let them walk around the paddock, eat hay, they won't. It's pretty simple.
Pretty easy, yeah.
But Neil's ranch was pretty incredible. We had this giant barn with a 1950s Hornby, the train set that you just can't believe. I think you can see pictures of it on the internet if you go looking.
Yeah.
He used to record in there, and Mulligan was there, and his manager used to come up quite a bit. Joni Mitchell lived next door. She had a ranch, like one block over, if you can call it that. It was a big ranch. I'm pretty sure he still got it. Of course, Peggy was there, and Amber was just sort of on the way, I think, or being thought about.
Right. Was Elliot up there? Elliot Roberts?
Elliot was up there, yeah. Yeah.
That was a good time at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. But, in the end, I couldn't sit around on the ranch. I was here to, get some work and do all that. And then Neil did an American tour. And I was kind of like first cab off the rank to do that tour.
And is that when you met Bob Stern?
That's when I met Bob Stern. Oh, no, we met Bob Stern in Europe.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Bob was in Europe.
Okay.
I can't understand why we were touring a PA though, but maybe we weren't.
You were touring a PA? Well, I know he had something to do with Maryland Sound at one point.
Well, he was Maryland Sound,
Oh, yeah.
I believe. But I'm not sure why we would have been touring a PA. Actually, I think we had English lights and American PA.
Wow.
Which is crazy because it's all 110.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the way they used to do it.
Maybe there was a system over there at the time.
Now, of course, we had an American PA. Jeep was there.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, all
Yeah,
those
yeah.
guys were there.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
did.
Was Redford on the tour?
Yep.
Remember you guys?
Yep. He was.
So
There's a lot about the tour I can't remember, Nick. Don't go too deep.
a lot of stuff I don't remember either, but that's okay. You can deny it. I'm like that myself.
There was a night in Munich I can remember, but we won't go there.
There's a lot of places we can't go. Believe me. I mean, and I met you first. I met you guys first in Portland.
Probably.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have
there
very
with the
fond,
lighting system.
very fond memories of Portland.
So do I. I tell you, I have very fond memories actually of the tour and working with you guys too. You know,
That was a good tour.
It was. It was.
That was really well put together.
Yeah.
We had days off in between gigs. We used to go and play golf and shit. It was pretty funny.
I know, but I think I mean, at the end of the tour, that's when Neil took us on his boat. There was an 83-foot granite hauler up in Vancouver. Were you there?
Nah, I didn't go on the boat.
Did you make that? You or Deborah, I guess. Because I don't remember you guys
Nah.
up there. You know, I just remember he said, "Stick around. We'll take you out on the tour, on the boat." And him and Peggy, they cook for us. I mean, I couldn't believe how nice Neil was. You know, I mean.
Neil was a top guy. But, well, when I eventually went back to Australia, and Neil came to Australia to tour in 1985, and he called up Michael Chugg, the local promoter, asking if I was back in Australia. And Chugg said, "Yeah, Tookie's here. He's around." He says, "Can you ask Meri if he'll be my personal assistant for me and my family for the tour? Just look after us." Because he came out with Ben, who was in the wheelchair, of course,
Right.
and Amber had just been born. I think she was like 6 months old, very young. And he had this major tour in Australia.
Right.
Played a lot of concerts. And Michael Chugg was the promoter. And yeah, so I went on that tour. I think it was 1985, maybe 84.
When did you stop touring? I mean, in the music business. I mean, you haven't. Do you remember?
Yeah, vaguely. No, I pretty much already stopped touring by then.
By then,
Yeah, I had another business.
yeah.
I had another business in Sydney called Production Techniques, and we were doing production for special events, which is where I ended up.
So when you went back, you started that business is after you were on tour, or you were started the business when you were working with Neil.
It's an interesting transition. I can tell you the story if you're interested.
Oh, man.
So I'm in LA, and there's a guy in LA called Greg Volich who used to work for Disney. And he called me up one day. He said, hey, Meri, he says, "I've got this opportunity to pitch for a corporate gig, and I think it's going to be really good, but it's in Hawaii. It's for a company called Apple Computer, and they're launching a new computer." And this is 1983, early 1983. He said they're launching this computer in Hawaii, but they really want it to be like a rock show. And this was industrial theatre, but right at the early days of industrial theatre. And it was only really companies like Apple, who were at the cutting edge, who were thinking, like, it's a corporate show, but it's not going to be slides. You know, we're Apple. We're not going to do slides in a projector. We want to do something whiz-bang. So we sat down for the weekend with an A3 drawing pad, and we knew we were going to a venue in Hawaii. We basically got the plans of the venue. I used to draw everything by hand in those days, do all my plans, hand draw them with a pencil. So we drew up a plan, come up with a basic set and scenery idea, screens, the Apple Macintosh flying in on a little, it was like a Spinal Tap moment, flying in on this Perspex platform with this laser cone doing all its thing around it. But I don't think anyone had ever used lasers in a corporate event. We showed 35mm film. We showed video, which must have looked like crap because it was really the early days of video.
Right.
And the resolution of video was terrible back then.
Probably one inch, maybe.
We had like
inch,
a
actually.
27 projector slideshow running. We had this major scenery. Anyway, so we put this proposal together, and we went in, took it into. We didn't go to Apple. We went to an agency, I think, that was looking after their work, and we presented. I think it was on the Monday morning. So we worked all weekend, didn't get much sleep, used stimulants to keep ourselves awake. Did the whole thing on handwritten on paper. So drawings. We hand wrote out a schedule, hand wrote out a budget, and we costed the whole job, I think it was just a smidge under $500,000 US for the whole job, which included flying production into Hawaii and, crew and the whole thing. And we did this presentation, and the guy said, "Could you give us a minute?" And they walked out of the room and just left us there in the room. Then they walked back in and said, "We've just been on the phone to Apple. What do we have to do to get you guys on board?" And I said, "Well, we need a deposit. We need 50% up front because we've got to book all this gear and lock all these people in. There's a lot of equipment, a lot of stuff." And they say, "Hang on a minute." He came back in with a check for 250,000 American dollars, and we didn't even have a bank account to put it in. So we're going, well, this is pretty cool. Anyway, so we did the job, and it was amazing. And Steve Jobs walked out on stage to a 7.5-minute standing ovation before he opened his mouth. It was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. 5,000 Apple resellers, they were called, literally standing on the chairs in the auditorium. It was like Jesus Christ had walked on stage. It was amazing. And I know it was 7.5 minutes because I was calling the show and I was running the stopwatch. I was going, are they actually going to stop and let this guy talk? It was ridiculous. Anyway, it was very successful.
That's great. That's a great story, actually. I had no idea that you were involved with that. Because I know later on in Apple's career, I started getting involved with them and calling some of the shows also. So I find that real interesting, especially when they started working with me, Peter Gabriel at the time. I think that might have been the mid-90s even.
I have no idea. Well, I did a lot of shows for Apple when I got back to Australia.
Right.
Anyway, so to cut a long story short, which I didn't, I'm in Hawaii. I've been pretty much on the road through Europe and America for 2 years. I was fed up with the whole green card battle and, really didn't like living in LA, and I just thought, shit, I might go home for a while. So I went back to Australia and spent the first 2 weeks back in Sydney in a morbid state of depression, going, why the fuck have I come back here? Which I didn't really understand. But then following that, Greg Volich, the Disney guy who I'd worked with, he came back to Australia with his family, and we started a company called Production Techniques. Production Techniques supplied production services to the corporate events industry, which at that time fundamentally didn't exist.
Right.
So we were there right at the start of the special events industry in Australia. And we did some amazing, amazing work. But we did go broke 6 years later, because even though we were really good at production, we were really crap at running a business. We would use the deposits on the jobs to pay for the previous job. So it was this vicious cycle of money, and it eventually caught up with us. I nearly lost my house over it, but at least I had a house to nearly lose.
No, back then there were a lot of fumbles. I know. I could see that. Even when I came to Australia in the middle of the 90s, I saw you guys growing. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to talk to you. We ended up using another production. Not actually, who is it? I forgot. David Jellings. I don't remember the name of the production company he was in.
Yeah.
And that was directed by IBM and the people at Encore over in Las Vegas. That's who I was using.
Yeah, Audience Motivation. AM, they were called.
Yeah, I am. There you go.
AM. Yeah. David Jellings,
That's
good
right.
guy. And Bruce Brown would have been there.
Right, exactly. I got a photograph of those guys sitting down at a meeting.
They were good guys.
Yeah.
They were smart guys too.
They were very good guys. They really supported us,
Yeah.
But basically, we ended up doing 2 shows, one an American version and one an Australian version.
Right.
And the Australian version was much more, they understood their audience a little better.
Yeah. Well, Audience Motivation pretty much built their business on the IBM having IBM as a client. I think they were like 70% of their business for a very long time.
Yeah, that's why.
But what Audience Motivation didn't do, they were the masters of the 27 projector slideshow. And what they didn't do as well as they could have was transition into the modern age. They did it quite well, but they didn't. They were too corporate. They didn't have enough theatrical skills.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and you know, where we did very well was because we had that whole rock and roll background, and we brought the whole rock and roll mentality into the corporate world, and it was magic. People wanted that.
Yeah, you're right.
Our clients wanted that.
Yeah, no. When I made the transition, around the same time you were. You know, I was starting to do corporate work and things like that, and they were ready for something like that. And being a road person and being able to think on your feet was just amazing.
To solve problems.
It blew people away. But what I couldn't believe when I started working in the business, it took so long to get anything done on site. That's how it was here. It would just wait and wait. I remember it took me 8 hours to hang 16 lights. Little things like that, which I would just
Wouldn't happen in Australia, mate.
No, I know. No, I kept going, guys, you can do this a lot faster. You know, wait. It didn't.
Well, you remember they used to handcuff me on the union stages so I couldn't touch a lamp?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Well, that's how it was.
Foster would come out with the handcuffs and he handcuffed me. So you touch a fucking lamp, you know, you're finished.
Yeah, that's it.
We'll have a crew walk out.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah, so that was my transition from rock and roll into sort of where I am.
So what do you do? What is the company you have now? What's the name of it?
Well, in 1989, Production Techniques just fell apart. You know, we were lucky not to lose our houses. We sort of managed to somehow save a sinking ship, but you know, we eventually paid off our debts and got out of there. And then I went back into production managing different events. And I remember one time we had Diana Ross, Phil Collins, I think Springsteen, and one other, like 4 major acts, all wanted me to production manage their Australian tours.
Wow.
And it was, you know, I mean, I was sort of flattered by that, but what it really brought home to me was my earning potential is only as big as my personal time. And I knew that was a problem. So I had to have something bigger, and I had something bigger with Production Techniques, but I'd fucked it up, basically, by not knowing how to run a business properly. But I learned a lot of lessons. And so anyway, I noticed, Nick, that there was a big hole in the market in Australia for drapes and staging and the physical accoutrements of special events. It was really difficult. I mean, it did a big Land Cruiser launch where we turned the tennis centre, Rod Laver Arena, where they play the Australian Open.
Right.
We turned it into a 4-wheel drive track and launched a Land Cruiser there. And I had surrounded I needed nearly a kilometre, over half a mile of draping to do it. And I had every black drape in Australia. I flew it in from Perth, Brisbane. And I thought, there's a hole in the market here. Anyway, so I started staging rentals. And I just got a seamstress and got a whole bunch of fabric and we just got a machine and we just started making drapes and building risers and, you know, just took it from there. You know, we're nearly 25 years old now. Yeah, and we're a company that turns over, you know, $12-13 million a year. And you know, but now we're a mature business, and of course now we've got all the copycats. And we have had for a long time. All the copycats go, oh, they do that, and now we'll do this. But you know, we're just constantly trying to stay ahead of the game.
No, that's it. I mean, when again, it is staying ahead of the game. You know, you can, and actually that's how I also feel about what I've been doing. Is I've always been ahead of the game, just a little bit, just enough. And now it's difficult to stay ahead of that game because there's so many people in the market. I mean, everybody's screaming for business. That's one of the reasons why I kind of had to pull back my video company because it's just so competitive.
Well, you got a kid with a little handy cam, we'll do it for $500.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
Like, that's why I brought in a partner who's younger than me into my business, and I don't really work in the business anymore, and I just let him run it and do it his way. You know, and like I don't actually agree with everything he does, but you give a guy put a guy in charge, you've got to let him run it.
That's right.
You know, and he's doing a great job.
That's great.
You know, he's doing a great job, and he's learnt so much. But he wouldn't have learned so much if I'd have been there trying to tell him what to do all the time, Like not like you can't hire that kind of guy anyway. You've got to hire a guy who wants responsibility.
Right.
And I think it's a much bigger thing than individual skills and it's the ability to take on responsibility, the human interaction, being able to talk to customers, being able to listen, all of that stuff these days is so much more important than how many projectors you've got and how much equipment you've got and how,
Listening is very important.
what control system you've got. No one cares. Your customer doesn't care. Customer just wants you to listen to their problem, come up with a solution.
Exactly. It's very simple. It's very, very simple. Nobody cares about this. Well, some people care, but
Yeah.
if they have confidence in you, it'll happen.
Yeah, but there are young people who are willing to go that extra bit, and they're the ones who ultimately will succeed.
Yeah, and that's what you have to find, and that's great. So now that you're kind of, what's your next move? What are you doing? Are you running your company? Are you thinking about retiring?
I don't run the company.
I mean, you're overseeing the company. What are you doing?
Don't even do that, really.
Don't even do it.
I turn up once a month for a financial meeting.
Wow.
See whether we're losing or making money.
Right.
Eventually I'll sell the business, and and I'll be out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But up until then, I'm pretty comfortable with the way it is. I mean, it's a lot of responsibility, but we have 28 full-time mouths to feed now. I've got offices in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. We're considered an industry leader, set the benchmark. I get called on all the time to present seminars, and I produce shows for people, but I don't charge them.
Right.
But I only do the things I believe in.
Right.
So I produce a national events industry gala dinner and awards night every year. Only because I used to go to them and they were crap, and I couldn't stand how shit they were. So I went to the CEO of the association and said, "You can't do this anymore. This is a special events industry. Your night of nights should be amazing." And it never is. It's always crap. And we sat down and worked out why it was always crap, and ultimately it was always crap because they didn't have a producer. They didn't have someone whose job it was to be in charge.
Right.
So, in any event, there has to be someone who's in charge.
Yep.
And ultimately, you can't do things with a committee.
No, you cannot.
So I became that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't charge him for that. It's just me giving back to the industry. I'm a judge for the Australian Event Industry Awards. I judge a number of different industry awards programs. It takes up my time, but I feel like if I'm not judging it, then, somebody else has to be doing it. So it's important. It's important that we sustain our business and that we sustain our industry, and we don't just, give up to the forces.
Keep on fighting.
Yeah, you got to keep battling the whole time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay, now any good stories? Tell me, Patrick. Let's start with Patrick.
Oh, Stansfield. Fucking classic. Yeah, so Stansfield, rest his soul, turns up in Australia with Bob Dylan. And because of the Carne arrangements, he turns up with something, I don't know, let's say it was 11 sea containers. And they're all sealed and tagged, and they've all got this supposed list of contents. And the kind of deal is, you turn up with 11 sea containers, you've got to leave with 11 sea containers. So we're unloading sea containers at the Sydney Cricket Ground, or Sydney Showground, I think it was. And this one sea container is in Stansfield. Says, "Don't open that one." Okay, Patrick, we're not opening that one. Okay. So 2 days later, it was a 4-day bumping or something. It was a big show. A couple of days later, this truck turns up. Big truck. And they open the back doors of the truck, and it's full of antique and collectible Australian period furniture. Stansfield's had a guy driving around the country towns of New South Wales, picking up probably for $10 a piece, antique and collectible. The guy knew what he was doing, knew what he was looking for, filling up the truck. The truck backs up. The container that we're not allowed to open is opened up, it's empty. The container gets filled up with antique collectible Australian furniture, gets the door gets shut on it. A screen goes up in it, and we're doing the bump out. A dozen speaker boxes go in the back of the container. And customs guy comes and has a look at it. Container number 11, speaker boxes, dozen speaker boxes. Tick the box, seals the container, sends it back to the States. No questions asked. Just took a 40-foot container full of antique Australian furniture out of the country. Thank you very much. I'm sure Bob paid for it.
I'm sure he did too.
That's my Patrick Stansfield story.
You know what? I hear Bob Dylan has a warehouse of VHS machines too.
Yeah. I have no idea who became the lucky recipient of the Australian furniture, but someone knew someone who wanted it.
Darn!
I bet it was worth a lot of money in America somewhere.
I wish Patrick was still around. I would love to talk to him about that.
He probably wouldn't even remember it.
He may not.
He probably did the same thing in Japan.
Yeah.
It was probably his modus operandi.
Let's talk about a little about Deborah. Let's
Yeah.
When you went Deborah ended up staying in the States for a while.
Yeah, she did. Oh, so I ended up in Hawaii doing the Apple conference. Then decided I had enough. I was going home. Deborah wasn't really interested in going back to Australia. She didn't come to Hawaii. She didn't work on that show. She was still in LA, and she just stayed in LA and just hang around America and picked up some more work. I think she did another tour with Neil.
Yeah, I think
she did. Yep.
I don't know if she did Fogelberg or not. I'm trying to remember.
I don't remember everything she did, but she just did some more work. But she was like a really hard-working girl. She had the work ethic from hell. It didn't kind of matter how tired she was. She'd just keep going. So I'm the crew boss on the Neil Young tour of Europe, and had all these English guys working supposedly on my crew, working for me. Kind of resented the fact some Aussie had just come in and just picked up the crew boss gig and they were just crew. And they were terrible. They were like lazy, used to complain all the time, weren't particularly competent. And one guy who was a really good guy, I don't know if you remember on that tour, we had Chip Monk, God bless him, decided that a really good place to put follow spots, it was technically his right, was right up here, but they ended up flying follow spots in front of the speaker stacks. So the guys on the follow spots had to wear these Harrier jump jet noise cancelling, specially made headsets so they could still hear the follow spot call and not get deafened. But even with them on, the noise intensity up there was something like 115, 120 dB or something. It was still... And the guys would come down from the follow spot position and they would literally be disorientated. And it would take them half an hour to kind of like readjust. But the problem was the guys up in the spots were the same guys who had run the loadout. One time this guy called Steve, a lovely guy, really good, hard-working English guy, came down from the follow spots and he was so disorientated, he actually stepped off a 3-metre high stage, went down, broke his leg. So he was the only guy on my crew who, apart from Deborah, I could rely on to actually do any work. So I called up the guy who ran Tasco in London, and I said, mate, I've got 6 guys on the road. I said, I'm one of them, Deborah's one of them, Steve's the next best, he's broken his legs, and the other 3 are fucking useless. And that were my exact words. I said, if you don't send me a fresh crew in the next couple of days to replace the guy with the broken leg and the other 3, I said, go and find yourself another tour manager because I won't be staying on this tour and Deborah will be coming with me. You won't have a crew. Anyway, it must have had an effect because the next morning 4 fresh guys turned up from England and the other guys were sent on a plane home with the guy with the broken leg.
Right.
So, yeah, but, they were hard times. We would get on a bus after the bump out 3 o'clock in the morning I always say I went to Europe and never saw Europe.
Yeah. No, I've never done a tour in Europe. But
I mean, we did a concert in Paris. We were on an island in the middle of the River Seine. In the distance, 20 miles away, you could see the Eiffel Tower. That's as close as we ever got to the centre of Paris. Because we would drive in, as you know, do the show. You know, maybe catch a kip on the bus in the afternoon if you got it done in time. But with the ridiculous rig that Chip had designed, we never got it done in time. We spent our whole time repairing things, fixing things, trying to make things work. And so yeah, we didn't get a lot of sleep. And you know, you're off to the next 400 miles or something to the next gig, and you basically crawl out of the bus after 3 hours sleep and start again.
Right. There's a lot of hard work back then. There's a lot of hard work now too.
Yeah, but look, I don't know how much it's changed, but I'm guessing it's not like that. But then on the other side of the coin, if we did have a night off, we wouldn't be going to bed early, that's for sure.
No, never did. Never did. You know, as I got more and more into doing industrials, I would stop going out because I couldn't stay up all night and do that anymore.
Yep.
I just couldn't.
That's pretty crazy.
So, how do you feel? And just a question, and maybe you've already answered that, but I'm going to ask you anyway. How do you feel working with the young people nowadays?
I love working with young people. I love the energy and enthusiasm. I love it.
Do you feel that they're do you feel like they're open? Do you feel like they're enthusiastic about it? Do you feel any kind of pushback, or from them when you're working with them?
Well, you know, if they're pushing back, they're not going to be working for me. And I'm not that hands-on. But 10 years ago, I'd still be quite hands-on on a job, and I like working with smart people, and I don't care, what your level of skill is. I'm more interested in your level of wanting to learn, and your ability to absorb concepts and turn them into practice. And I've seen some great kids that come in with just know nothing, but they just want to learn. And ultimately, young people do want to learn stuff. I don't think there are really many young people who just want to sit around watching TV and smoking pot. I don't think they actually want, because they don't get anything out of it. And the thing that the young people who work for me get out, they just love it when they do a show and they put it in the shop and they put it up, and they just so many times they say to me, "Wow, you should have seen it. It looked great." And there's the thing we all need is that sense of satisfaction, knowing that you've done a good job. Like even when we were out with Neil or any of those bands, you put it up, you do a cracker show and the lights look great and it all looks fantastic and the audience goes nuts. You get a buzz out of it.
You do. No, it's a high. It is. I definitely agree.
You get a buzz out of it. And that's also the problem, I think, now that we're having with a lot of roadies, aging roadies. And I don't know if you know about it here, but in Australia it's a real big problem, is we're seeing a lot of suicides. So the biggest cause of death at the moment amongst guys that used to be on the road is suicide, depression-related suicide, because they can never get that buzz back. Their lives have been at this level up here, this high level, and it's just not there for them anymore.
No, and you're right, Meri. I absolutely understand that. They've been.
How can I replace that?
They have a high, and then all of a sudden you're not doing that anymore, and that's the hardest thing actually, is to find something to replace that and be okay with it. I think it's part of life. I mean, I think about now myself. Would I want to go out on the road like I did? Part of me goes, yeah. Well, not really, but it's like when I go see a concert sometimes, I'll get anxious. I'll see the lights. I'll see this and go, God, yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I feel like I want to be invited to the party, as they say. And then I kind of...
You probably don't want to be crawling along the truss focusing every park can either.
No, not anymore.
But they don't do that anymore.
Yep, that's what I hear,
It's all automated fixtures. The guy just sits there and remote controls it.
Yeah.
Every now and then, that light's not working. Oh, shit, better send someone up there to get it down.
Right. So, Mary, yeah, but if somebody wanted to get into business, what would you say that for them to do? You have any advice?
Have you thought about medicine?
Really? You know what? Being a plumber, I hear, is really good too. It pays better. Okay, so one more thing, and then we can wrap it up. You were just saying there was a story about me. I'm curious. You can say anything can you remember anything? I don't remember anything from that tour. Very little.
I do remember spending 5 days in a hotel room in New York.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well,
a little bit. You know, I mean, you can tell. You know,
I don't have a lot of regrets in my life, but I do regret spending 5 days in a fucking hotel room in New York, snorting cocaine, and we must have done grams of cocaine. It must have been thousands of dollars worth. And we were in New York City, and I think I went to the Empire State Building once, and that was pretty much all I did. And we had ordered room service, and I'm not sure why we did that.
Yeah.
But we did.
It might have been raining outside. No, I know. Yeah.
I think we just, the problem? We just finished a tour, and it was like, we're all kind of like in tour mode, which is really hyper, loads of adrenaline, running like crazy. And, what we should have been doing, we all had plenty of money. We'd made good money. We should have been doing is going out and eating in nice restaurants and maybe going to the occasional nightclub and doing a bit of, the Aussies should have been doing some sightseeing and doing all of that. And after 5 days of basically sitting around the hotel room snorting coke, I just wasn't quite sure why I did that. But it was actually quite cathartic in that I didn't really have the same appetite for that drug after that. Because I'd realised I'd pretty much wasted 5 days and $5,000.
Mm-hmm. That's what happens. There's a realization that comes along with all that when you look around and say, "Oh shit, I missed something here," because
it was crazy.
Because that was the day, man.
Yeah.
That was it.
Because the other problem was that when I was in America, I was looking for a wife. So I needed to get a green card, and I knew if I married an American girl, the rules were pretty relaxed back then. I knew I could probably get a green card if I was married to an American girl.
Right.
So I put an advertisement in the LA Times that an Australian man needs American wife. My phone number. And I got about 100 phone calls. So I had to go and check these girls out. Well, that was a very interesting experience, all by itself.
So, sounds like the beginning of Match.com.
Well, it sort of was, Craigslist in the LA Times.
Right.
But, it was some very interesting. Like the night I went back to some girl, she was smoking hot, this girl. It's like Latino girl. And I went back to her condominium in Marina del Rey. And I walk in the front door and there's this huge black guy in there. And she said, "Oh, this is Donald. Don't worry about him. He's my husband's bodyguard." No, my boyfriend's bodyguard. I'm going, "What the hell?" He said, "Yeah, he's cool." I said, "Where's your boyfriend?" "Oh, he's in Colombia." "What's he doing in Colombia?" "He's probably buying drugs." So her boyfriend's in Colombia buying drugs. She's shagging me in the apartment in Marina del Rey. And the big black bodyguard's sleeping in the bedroom next door. When you think you're kind of like on the edge of risk? But it was worth it. But, So
well, that's what I like to hear. At least it was.
So the next morning I get up and I wandered back to where my car was and it was gone. And it'd been towed and impounded. So it cost me like $100 to get my car out. And but it was still worth it.
So obviously.
But I didn't get a wife.
Yeah, that's what I kind of figured.
No, the closest was Demetrius, the big black girl, 6'3", I think she was, from Burbank in California. And she really, really, really wanted to marry me. She used to pick me up on her motorcycle. It was a Harley Davidson.
That's great.
It was fantastic fun. She was fantastic fun. But I couldn't marry her. And another girl in Texas called me up and said, "Come to Texas." And I just hung out in this girl's house in Texas. And what are we doing here? And that's when I got the phone call from Tim Foster. He said, I remember his words exactly. He said, "Get the fuck out of Texas. Come up here. Come and stay on the ranch." he rescued me. I literally walked out, and this Texas girl said, "What are you doing? I thought we were going to get married." I go, "No, we ain't, honey. We're out of here. I've got an invitation to a ranch." But I think I must have been losing the plot somewhat.
You know.
But I thought it was important if I was going to develop my career to be able to do it in America, because I couldn't see it happening in Australia. Because there's a definite glass ceiling there.
Right, but little did you know that Australia had a hole in the market.
Yeah, well, you know, like the best thing was I went back there and some girl who I had the hots for a very, very long time was still there, and she still had the hots for me. And come April 20, it'll be 30 years of marriage to her.
Wow, that's great. That is great. I was not so lucky, but anyway.
Some call it luck.
Yeah, some call it luck. But anyway.
All right.
So that's
you got what you need, Nick?
Yeah, I got what I need. Definitely. This is the kind of stuff. So thanks a lot, Mary. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. See you later.
Bye.
So what do you think, huh? Not too bad. What I'd like to do actually is dedicate this interview to Deborah Vincent and Patrick Stansfield. These are two wonderful road mates. Working with both of them was a pleasure. They're not with us anymore. Also to this guy back here, that's me, and it's Tim Foster. Mary actually mentioned him in the interviews. So, you know, good people. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for stopping by.
O'clock in the morning,